Welcome back, my fellow peanuts, and welcome to anyone who is new to my channel or to this podcast. Now, this podcast may not be suitable for young listeners. There may be graphic and violent content, so listener and viewer discretion is advised. Welcome back, everybody. I'm so sorry that I haven't had an opportunity to do an episode, but I did get married. It was absolutely fabulous. I can't tell you how much that day was absolutely incredible. I'm really, really lucky. We got a beautiful, beautiful spring day in Melbourne, no rain, and it was just gorgeous. I will have to see if my husband is okay with me putting photos into this episode. So weird to say husband, by the way. But I will possibly be putting up like maybe a little montage on YouTube, like just a little shorts just to show everybody. We have had a sneak peek from the photographer and it was fabulous. So I'm kind of excited. But I am a little bit excited to be doing this episode. So there's still so much going on about the Menendez brothers at the moment. And I watched the documentary on Netflix after they did The Monsters, which I've really thoroughly enjoyed. So I'm going to do a follow-up episode, and this is the follow-up episode. Now, given that I skimmed over a lot of their arrest and their trial in my last episode, just because there was so much to cover, right, guys? There was so much content. There was so much everything that I really felt like I skipped over and grazed over some pretty important facts. And I sort of wanted to, I guess, highlight some components about their arrest and just some components about their trial. Little bit of opinions, again, also going to do a follow-up as to where we're sitting today and all that kind of stuff. But I thought more than anything, it just sort of needed a little bit more context around some of their arrest and their trial itself. Now, so I'm going to give you a really quick recap. On August 20th, 1989, Lyle and Eric Menendez executed the murder of their parents. Now, they were armed with shotguns. They shot their parents multiple times inside their Beverly Hills mansion. Their father was Jose Menendez. He was found with, I think it was 5 bullet wounds. There was definitely a shot to his head. Their mother, Mary Louise Kitty Menendez, she suffered 9 gunshots. It was definitely one of the most brutal sort of murders that the LAPD had seen themselves. So it was really, it did look like it was really personal. So we're actually going to start our podcast with the aftermath of the murders, which would lead to the boys' arrests, the trial, and their ongoing support that they've received. And we're talking a massive amount of support, guys. If you go and type into TikTok, you will see all of these videos about people saying, hey, we need to release them, all this kind of stuff. There's a really huge following in regards to this. My personal belief is that I do think they actually need to be resentenced, and it does need to be looked at. I definitely think, and I really did capture this on my last episode, I really do think that those boys, there was something fundamentally wrong in that household. You do not have the support of your families for as many years as they have in regards to saying that they need to be resentenced. There's too many components. There's too many family and friends that just sort of admit that there was something a little bit off about Jose. And they definitely, and I covered this off in my last episode, so if you haven't actually had an opportunity to watch it, go back and watch my episode on the Menendez brothers, and I talk about Kitty's childhood. She was definitely exposed to violence and sort of, I think, already knew how to hide things that weren't great inside a household. So I think there was definitely a component for me that I do believe the boys. I think that more than anything, for me personally, there were some components that were a little bit off, but at the same time, I'm like, oh, hang on, what would have you been like at 19 years old and you'd been just given $2 million? And mind you, it's $2 million back in like the 90s. So it would be the equivalent of, I can't even tell you how much today. But I can tell you I would have been pretty stupid. Like, I would have just spent money on absolute garbage. I would have gone and bought myself a Porsche. I would have gone out and bought a house. Like, I would have done all the sort of things that they did do and be quite irresponsible. So I don't know, like, let me know your thoughts in the comments below, what your thoughts are on this, because I'm really intrigued whether maybe I'm rose-tinted glassing this a little bit. You know, I've seen so many documentaries. They seem so charismatic. They seem so, you know, even on those documentaries, they're really well spoken. They're really, I don't know. And maybe, again, maybe I've got some rose-tinted glasses on about this. Anyway. Sorry, went on a bit of a sidetrack there. So after he had been questioned by the police, Eric would actually try and call his brother Lyle, but he couldn't reach him. He definitely, after that, he was starting to feel a massive amount of anxiety, and he just needed someone to, you know, talk to and get some of this stuff off his chest. So he calls the psychotherapist, Dr. Jerome Oziel. On October 31, during a session, Eric and his therapist, Jeremy, or Oziel, we'll call him Oziel, he would walk around Beverly Hills. They were discussing his depression, his suicidal thoughts. Once they're almost back at the office, Eric would confess and say, "We did it. We actually killed our parents." Eric actually said to Oziel that while watching the Billionaire Boys Club with Lyle, they discussed their belief that Jose had planned to disinherit them and how he controlled their lives, and he was being influenced by the miniseries, and they decided to kill Jose. Now, Kitty presented the real problem because the brothers did not want to kill her, but they couldn't think of a way to kill their father without murdering her. Now, he would actually stop Eric from saying any more and had him call Lyle. He would quickly go to the Oziel's office, and before Lyle arrived, Eric would continue his story about a trip to San Diego where they bought their shotguns and how he and his brother believed they'd committed the perfect crime. They'd clean up the shotgun casings. They weren't worried about fingerprints because the crime happened in their own home. But after cleaning up, Lyle would drive Eric's car to around Mulholland Drive. Eric was at that stage a little too shaken to drive after the murders. He was told to give directions. They'd stop and wait for an area and stop in an area, but they waited for it to be clear. And Eric would end up throwing the shotguns into a canyon. They headed for a gas station where they dumped their clothing that was blood splattered, and they would dump their shoes in a dumpster with the shell casings. It was then that they would drive home. They'd originally intended to drive to the Cheesecake Factory to meet up one of their friends, but Eric was having a meltdown, as such we'll probably call it, so they went home and called the police. Lyle is furious when he arrives at Oziel's office. He's angry that Eric has disclosed everything. He's believing that Jose would even commend him for this perfect murder. So Oziel would clarify the difference between a crime of passion and one committed for a very specific goal. And he would label them as both sociopaths. The brothers acknowledged, though, that they were sociopaths, which would prompt Lyle to threaten Oziel and warning him pretty severely, like upon death, basically, if he had revealed their secret. So sorry, I'm just going to take a sip. Now, at some point in November, once again, they would meet with Oziel, and it would be during that time that once again Lyle will reiterate this threat and mention that they'd actually talked about killing him because he knew their secret. And though he could have reported them due to the threats, which would end up nullifying the patient-client confidentiality, he actually chose to document the sessions instead with notes and recordings. It's some point in the following year, in March 1990, where the detectives would actually receive their biggest break in the case from Judah Smith. Now, she's a 37-year-old owner of an audio tape duplicating business. Now, she happened to be having an affair with Dr. Oziel. She would inform the police that Dr. Oziel had actually requested her presence during a therapy session with the Menendez brothers at some point in October in 1989. Now, she reported overhearing a very heated argument between Lyle and Eric, and during that, it said, "I can't believe you told him. We've got to kill him and anyone associated with him before running out of the office." But She would run out of the office after hearing this, and she was in tears. She observed Lyle exiting the office, though, followed by Dr. Oziel, and she claimed to have witnessed Lyle threatening him. She informed the police that Oziel continued counselling the brothers, suggesting that he could help them to understand their family's history that led to their parents' murders. Now, she also mentioned during this time while talking to the police that Dr. Oziel had actually taped their confessions and all of their explanations. Imagine being the LAPD and getting this huge break after suspecting that it was the boys, but not really having enough evidence or anything like that. But you've had this massive break because and I will call him what he was, a dirty scoundrel, because Dr. Oziel is not a good guy. He's not a good guy at all. We're going to get into that in a little bit, but he's not a good psychologist or psychotherapist, I think he was. But he is, in any way, shape, or form, he is not to be in that profession. So on March 8th in 1990, LAPD would obtain a search warrant based on the information that she'd given. Oziel would hand over 17 audio tapes and 7 pages of notes. Now, the detectives would listen to parts of the tapes, revealing the details of the murder. The tapes and the notes were sealed and taken to the the Los Angeles County Courthouse in Santa Monica, where a judge would later decide if patient therapist confidentially applied to the Menendez brothers. But on around the same time, what's happening is Lyle and his 2 friends, they're flying from Newark to Los Angeles, and he would intend to get some money back from a concert promoter that Eric had paid him. But it's during that flight that he learned detectives had visited Mr. Buffalo's shortly before he left the airport. And this is where they got their shotguns, and this is where it's all leading back to oh crap moments. Now, Glenn Stevens, who happened to be one of Lyle's friends, he's sitting next to him, and he saw him take out the money clip, give Glenn $1,400 and hand him a business card. He instructed Glenn to use the money for bail if anything happened to him, adding that his therapist knew absolutely everything. Now, at about 1 p.m. on March 8th, Lyle and his mates headed to the Cheesecake Factory for lunch. Isn't that an omen, right? Like, you're meant to head to the Cheesecake Factory the night that you're just murdered your parents, and you're heading there when you're just about to get arrested. So he would end up driving his friends in Eric's Jeep. Meanwhile, they're awaiting nearby the police. They opted not to actually storm where they were living. They wanted to arrest Lyle, who was planning to leave again, but preferred catching him with Eric. But he was actually in Israel for a tennis tournament. And Glenn Stevens would notice something really unusual when the Jeep left the mansion. A blue Ford with a flashing light would block Elm Drive, causing Lyle to reverse into a van that was blocking him in, and the police surrounded them and they ordered them out of that car really quickly. Lyle and his friends were handcuffed and they're taken to the West Hollywood Sheriff Station. It was then that Lyle was actually moved to the LA County Men's Jail. In the afternoon, though, District Attorney Ira Reiner held a news conference, and he would state that the crime's motive was greed. He'd cite $14 million was an ample reason for murder. He would also mention that the charges could lead to the death penalty at St. Quentin. The Menendez family, specifically Lyle's uncle Carlos Barlett, he expressed massive support for the boys. The media then speculated whether Eric would flee Israel, but a Menendez family member would say that Eric was actually really dependent on Lyle. So after Lyle's arrest, Eric actually called his uncle Carlos from Israel, and he would be advised really quickly, turn yourself in before this becomes a shit show. Eric would fly to Miami where he'd meet his aunt, and she would end up informing the police detectives on what their plans were. Detectives would meet Eric and Maria at the LAX. and immediately took him into custody. He's booked into the LA County Men's Jail as well. Now, despite arresting the brothers, the detectives continued building their case without any physical evidence leading to them, linking them to the murders. So this Judalyn Smith, she's revealed that Eric, where he'd thrown the guns into the canyon and where they were purchased in San Diego. So believing that the brothers chose a smaller store close to the freeway between Los Angeles and San Diego, one of the detectives in particular, Detective Zola, he searched all the small stores but found nothing. However, on March 14th, at a Big Five store, they discovered records. Two of the detectives would discover records of 2 shotguns that had been sold on August 18th in 1989, and it's been signed by a Donovan J. Goodrow with a San Diego address. Now, he's immediately called this Donovan and asked about his whereabouts on August 18th. Donovan would end up confirming that he was working in a restaurant in New York City and he clocked in for the day. The address on the form was actually a fake, but the driver's license number matched Donovan's. Now, Donovan would notice almost immediately that the signature that he saw wasn't his. So Assistant DA Elliott sought court permission to collect handwriting samples from Lyle and Eric for comparison. Eric flat out refused, but they actually ended up being able to get a link to the Menendez brothers and to Jose and Kitty's murders. They would really, really quickly. So the Anderson, and that's Kitty's original last name, was the Anderson and the Menendez families hired highly regarded but really costly legal counsel for Lyle and Eric. Leslie Abrasom was selected to represent Eric. We've talked about her before. With a distinctive appearance and a really strong determination, she was influenced heavily by her grandfather. He is an international ladies' garment worker. He's an international ladies' garment workers union organizer. She was known to be really assertive in court, and she would openly display her emotions. She strongly opposed the death penalty and has a notable record with only one client ever receiving the death sentence. The Menendez case would end up being her 50th high-profile murder case, and her dedication to her clients sometimes raised questions about her conduct. But her fee for defending Eric was $750,000. Now, the Menendez brothers were arraigned for the murders of their parents on March 26, 1990. It's in Judge Judith Stein's courtroom in the Beverly Hills Municipal Court. The brothers appeared really indifferent as they faced these serious charges. She was really unimpressed by these two guys. They're slouching casually in front of her. She disapproved of their banter with their attorneys, their attention towards their girlfriends, families, and friends in the audience. It just seemed like they were being very cavalier about and very smug. Like a lot of people have commented when they saw the pictures of them, very smug, very cavalier. So I do sort of see it. But at the same time, I want to say this in the best possible way because I feel like I'm making light of it. But they're young and I don't know if they understood, and they're young and they're rich. And I don't think they quite understood what was going on, like the severity of where they were. And everything had always been managed and handled for them. So it just feels like they didn't get the severity of it. And I think they just thought that they were going to get away with it and there was going to be no trial or anything like that. I think genuinely they just were really cavalier about it all. So Judge Stein, she's reading the charges and she says, you're accused of multiple murders for financial gain with a loaded firearm, potentially facing the death penalty. How do you plead? Now, Eric apparently smirked, not guilty, Your Honour, and Lyle echoes it, saying not guilty. They end up being held without bail pending a trial for first-degree murder with special circumstances. Now, special circumstances usually means that they're going after the death penalty, that they're going to go after it. Now, the families would end up hiring Jill Lansing to represent Lyle. Now, she's a lawyer who's only just recently left the county public defender's office. But unlike Leslie, who is really experienced with high-profile cases, Jill, she preferred the lower-profile work. But both lawyers were brought in. They brought in assistance pretty quickly. Leslie would hire Marsha Morrissey. She's another former public defender, while Jill hired Michael Burt. He's an expert in death penalty law. Now, Elliot Alderhuff, he was initially set to prosecute the Menendez brothers, but due to conflicts with the district attorney Ira Reiner, he was replaced by Pam Ferrero. Ferrero would end up actually marrying one of the assistant district attorneys, Peter Bosnich. Pam Bosnich, who was a Wesley graduate, is a professional and very understated, contrasting with the flamboyancy of Leslie. She'd recently also prosecuted the retrial of a fairly high-profile preschool molestation case. I don't really like her, though. I will be honest. The documentaries I've watched with her, the vitriol that she still has towards the Menendez brothers, the opinions that she still holds, and I said it really clearly on my last episode, I really don't like her. She was really undermining any type of sexual abuse and saying it couldn't happen, and it's just I don't like her, and I can't tell you why, guys. It's just a gut feeling. It's just something about it. It's just she's, as I just stated, the vitriol that it's just, yeah, no, not for me. Now, Judge James Albright ruled that Lyle's threats to Dr. Oziel nullified the patient-therapist confidentiality and ordered the tapes to be given to the district attorney. The tapes included all of his notes and recording of the December 11th session, taped with consent from the brothers' lawyer at the time. In California, though, patient-therapist privilege is really, really strong, and it remains even if a patient confesses to a murder. Therapists can't report to the police without risking a malpractice lawsuit. So this privilege exists, but because effective psychotherapy requires patients to share intimate details freely. I'm of a pretty big stance that when it comes to murder, abuse, and all those kind of things, I'm pretty big on you should just report it. And I do get that there's that fear of malpractice and stuff like that, but they're admitting to murder. And I would like to think that if someone had murdered me and if someone was confessing to it, I'd want that therapist to be reporting my murder and my murderer. But I do also see that need for that privacy, because I've admitted things to my counselors and I've admitted things to psychologists that perhaps I wouldn't want the free world knowing. But at the same time, it is therapeutic to tell things, and sometimes it does help. So I don't know, off on a tangent. Sorry, guys. There would be several hearings about the tapes. And after one of the hearings, the Sheriff's Department announced that they had discovered that the links in Lyle's ankle chain had been cut. To the Sheriff's Department, this indicated that Lyle was about to escape. And in another hearing on the tapes, Eric's nose appeared to be bruised and swollen, and this is a result of a jail beatings that the Sheriff's Department said they were investigating. So there's obviously some stuff going on behind the scenes as well. So there is a little bit, I think there was a little bit going on in the jails. But on August 6 in 1990, Judge Albright ruled that all tapes could be used as evidence against the Menendez brothers. He found sufficient cause to believe that they were threatening and justified that and justifying the disclosure of their communications. Leslie appealed this decision, and in March 1991, the California Court of Appeals overturned it, stating that Dr. Oziel had acted out of self-preservation rather than a psychotherapist. This decision, which included quotes from the tapes, which was made public, revealing that the brothers had killed their parents. The revelation would end up shocking quite a few family members, So some of them who were supporting them at the time would end up withdrawing it and going, you didn't admit that you killed your parents. On June 4th in 1992, the Supreme Court heard arguments about the tapes that related to the threats. Leslie and Michael Burt argued that the only parts of the tapes that should be shared, that the only parts of that should be shared with the prosecution. So in August, the court ruled that the prosecution could have one tape from October 31st and November 2nd sessions, but barred the release of a tape from November 28th and another from December 11th due to the insufficient evidence of threats. The trial could now proceed. Now, at this stage, I believe it's been over 2 years since the brothers had been arrested. That's a long time to stand and wait for trial. I would be incredibly anxious at this stage to just get the whole thing over with. If I'd been in their situation, I understand the stalling, but at the same time, that's a long time to be sitting in jail. Long time. So the Menendez brothers spent 3 years in Los Angeles County's men's jail, segregated and housed separately with other high-profile inmates such as Richard Ramirez and O.J. Simpson. They ate meals in their cells and exercised for 1 hour 3 times a week. Now, initially, Eric was really suicidal and was told to start taking Xanax, while a priest's visits led him to disclose some of his childhood traumas. This formed the basis for the defense that they're going to use. In June 1990, Eric would actually end up starting weekly therapy with Dr. William Vickery. I do apologize. I'm just going to take a drink. I've been talking for a long time. Lyle's making frequent long phone calls, causing complaints from other prisoners. After deputies would find an ankle chain nearly cut, though, they would inspect his and Eric's cells. Now, I alluded to this before. They would end up discovering a 17-page letter from Lyle to Eric, and this was notes outlining plans to travel to South America, to the Middle East, and building and drawings of stairwells and doors. The drawings didn't match any courthouses that Lyle had visited. But in Lyle's letter, he tells Eric that he would never testify against him. Lyle also gives Eric some advice that Lyle believes Eric would have, like Jose would have given him. He would write, "I'm not an ordinary person. I do not see things in terms of manslaughter and life terms. I see only win, loss, honor, and dishonor. Dad is watching, and I will not disappoint him a second time or Mum by giving up and having their deaths be in vain." So on December 8th in 1992, the Menendez brothers, they're indicted by the Los Angeles County Grand Jury on charges that they murdered their parents. There were 2 special circumstances that were attached to the brothers' cases, which made them eligible for the death penalty. A multiple murder had occurred as the brothers were lying in wait, and a 3rd special circumstance that the brothers committed the murders for financial gain. But this actually ended up getting thrown out by the grand jury. So obviously they didn't find enough evidence that the brothers had killed for financial gain. So the brothers' trial ended up taking place at the Los Angeles County Superior Court in the San Fernando Valley in Van Nuys. This is presided by Judge Stanley Weisberg. Now, he is the judge that presided over the first Rodney King trial. This would end up leading to what everybody remembers as the LA riots after the acquittal of those 4 LAPD officers. That's something I would love to do a podcast on. I really want to, but I'm so passionate about civil rights and so passionate about that whole entire case that I think I would sit the whole time wanting to yell. So I'm not sure if that would be an effective podcast for me to do, but maybe if I can remove myself and be a little bit more diplomatic, I could definitely try it, but I'm just not sure. Food for thought. On May 14th in 1993, Judge Weisberg decided that Lyle and Eric Menendez would end up being tried together for reasons of time, cost, and convenience, noting that separate trials would end up resulting in identical witnesses and arguments. So each brother was assigned to their own separate jury, meaning that Eric's jury would be excluded when evidence only pertaining to Lyle was presented and vice versa. Leslie and Jill kept their defense strategy secret. The prosecutor speculated whether they would argue that there wasn't enough evidence against Eric and Lyle. However, during a pre-trial hearing on June 9th in 1993, she announced that the defense would concede the brothers had murdered their parents. Now, the defense's aim was to convince the jurors that Jose and Kitty Menendez, not Lyle and Eric, were responsible. The defense aimed to convince the jurors that Kitty and Jose Menendez, not Lyle and Eric, were actually responsible for the motive behind the murders, arguing that the brothers had acted out of long-term fear from alleged abuse. The challenge was that the brothers had never reported any of this abuse, nor was there any medical, there's no physical, there's no photographic evidence. In order to this be a successful defense, they needed to provide detailed accounts of very specific incidences involving Lyle and Eric, while the prosecution needed to prove that their claims were pure fabrication and lies. So on July 17th in 1993, 3 days before the trial even started, Leslie would end up giving an interview to the LA Times. She said that a series of the word she used was intense confrontations between the brothers and their parents, which had led to their murders. Now, during this interview, she laid out their case would primarily consist of the defense destroying the image of the Menendez brothers. So Leslie and Jill would consult with a gentleman by the name of Paul Mones. He's a lawyer and a children's rights advocate. He wrote a book, When a Child Kills: Abused Children Who Kill Their Parents. He would explain how to defend children accused of this crime. His research would indicate that these children are typically peaceful, but suffer prolonged abuse from secretive parents. But when they fight back, it's often during a moment when the abuser is vulnerable, and it leads to acts characterized as overkill. He also argued that the parents are at fault in all of these situations. So Leslie and Jill would take the advice of Paul's, and they would dress Eric and Lyle in boyish clothes to just portray them as a little bit younger than 22 and 25. They wanted to emphasize their youth, so specifically Leslie would act like an indulgent aunt by picking lint off his sweater and keeping her arm on his shoulder, showing that sort of, family values and there. Her behavior suggested a misunderstood boy rather than a monster itself. Now, the defense utilized a diagnostic tool that had been developed by a therapist by the name of Sue Bloom. Its intended use was for incest survivors. This tool is a 34-item checklist that addresses the aftermath of childhood sexual abuse. Several items on this checklist were applicable to both brothers, and it includes indicators such as sleeping alone, blocking out early life memories, harboring a terrible secret, engaging in theft, conditions that Eric acknowledged pretty specifically that he'd experienced himself. Lyle's behaviours aligned with a checklist such as a desire to disassociate from his family, creating a fantasy world, which he did when he created a world with his stuffed animals. He exhibited rigid control over thought processes and feeling pressured to achieve being loved. Now, since their 1989 arraignment, Eric and Lyle had undergone some fairly significant transformations. They seemed really cocky and arrogant and cavalier, but obviously 3 years in jail had really significantly changed them. They're obviously a little bit more mature. They understand the way they're meant to behave. They appear to even have lost some weight. It was during this time that Lyle still continued to wear his hairpiece. it's really one of the only things that remained about him from the 3 years before. So it's really interesting for me to think, oh goodness, this is a completely different man. Throughout the trial, their grandmother, Maria Menendez, along with their aunts, Marta and Terry, they supported them. But notably, there was an absence of members from the Anderson family. I might add, because I don't know if I'll remember to say it at the end of this podcast, the Anderson family have now supported the resentencing of the brothers. So they're actually they're supporting that they be released. At least that's what I heard on an article or a documentary or read, or I can't remember even what, but they are supporting this now. So they are supporting the brothers. Now we've got Deputy District Attorney Pamela Bosnich. She approached the trial with mixed feelings, especially regarding the death penalty. Although she really did support the capital punishment, she recognised that a lot of jurors really do not like to impose it. But then you've got contrast, Lester. He firmly believed in the death penalty for the Menendez brothers because he considered them cold and remorseless. Prior to the trial, Pam suggested to defence attorney that they should possibly look at a plea bargain. There was never, ever any wanting of that from Leslie or Jill. So they were never able to come together and actually work out a plea agreement. In addition to the legal professionals and the judge, a single television camera played a role in the trial. So they permitted Court TV to broadcast the proceedings due to the high public interest, but limited the seating in the actual courtroom. I can't quite comprehend how big this probably was in 1993 that you were able to watch this trial. So the trial begins in July with opening statements from both sides laying out what the prosecutor thought had happened and what the defence were laying out their defence as such. Further developments were disclosed during Leslie's opening statement, though. She echoed Jill's opening statements where she described the week leading up to the murders. She recounted an incident where Kitty and Lyle engaged in a really heated argument, during which the time that she removed Lyle's headpiece, and it's revealed that Lyle experienced significant hair loss at the age of 14, and he was forced to wear a toupee because Jose wanted him to have a public image and didn't want him being known as bald. At the time, Eric had no idea that Lyle was wearing a toupee. And this is what ended up leading Eric to disclose about the sexual abuse that he'd been experiencing at the hands of his father. Now, the brothers were trying to buy handguns, but they couldn't wait the 2-week period, so they ended up going down to San Diego to buy the shotguns. Leslie told Eric's jury that Eric looked forward to attending UCLA and moving away from home, but there was pressure from Lyle that he would still be at home and still attending UCLA. So it was very, very hard for him to get away from his father. So it felt like all the world's walls were closing in, is what he said. So after she finished her opening statement, the prosecution would remind the jurors that Eric had confessed to Dr. Oziel. Eric had told Oziel about killing Jose because of the harsh treatment on him, but he never mentioned at the time the sexual abuse. And the same was true to when Eric confessed another time. The brothers had never spoken about abuse until they needed a legal defense, is what the prosecution is saying. Almost 7 months after their parents had been murdered, this is when they disclosed it. In the first phase of the trial, the prosecution would end up calling 26 witnesses, including Lyle's bodyguards, a store clerk who sold Eric the shotguns, 2 computer experts who examined Kitty's computer for an updated will. These witnesses aimed to show that the brothers were skilled liars and they'd actually planned and executed their parents' murders. The prosecution would also play Lyle's 911 call to show his acting skills. One of the officers testified that he saw Eric and Lyle run around and yell after the murders, but not cry over their parents' murders. Now, I might add, just because I've spoken fairly heavily about it on my previous podcast, but I do want to be really clear. It is not unheard of that a victim of child abuse or sexual abuse is not going to disclose it until they're backed into a corner. It is not unheard of. And obviously, and we'll hear a little bit about it in the next couple of minutes in regards to what the defense did, but there were many people that were aware of this. This wasn't something that it was like a fairly well-known family secret. So I don't know. I think it's very, when women get beat, oh, you never told anyone about it. So it's very similar sort of circumstance, at least in my opinion it is. So Dr. Oziel, who's the prosecution's star witness, he faced credibility issues up the wazoo. Leslie vowed to discredit him thoroughly. The defense argued that Oziel manipulated Lyle and Eric to say what he wanted. On July 23rd, the California State Board of Psychology filed a complaint to revoke his license due to alleged improper relationships with two patients, not one, two. He began in August his 6th day of testimony for the prosecution. He testified before both Lyle and Eric's juries that the brothers wanted to kill Jose because they felt that he was controlling their lives and made them feel inferior. Kitty was killed because the brothers did not want her to be left behind as a witness. The defense achieved a point when Judge Weisberg ruled that Oziel could not use the term sociopath, considering it's a prejudicial term that might be used to bias the jury against the brothers. For both of the prosecutors, Oziel provided the only detailed recreation of the murders. And this was in the brother's own words. So he undermined the defense strategy pretty heavily. They wanted to portray the killings as self-defense after years of physical and mental and sexual abuse. Oziel testified that Eric told him that the plan to kill Jose and Kitty was rooted in a situation when Eric was watching the BBC television show Billionaire Boys Club. He told him that Jose had just been completely dominating, controlling, and was impossible to please. Oziel also testified that the brothers decided to kill their mother because the brothers did not believe that Kitty could survive emotionally without Jose. Now, you're already hearing some words like he's completely dominating, he's controlling. You don't want to dig a little bit deeper into what that means? You're a psychotherapist. So, I don't know. But Eric also told Oziel that Jose's near disinheritance of him was an example of why him and Lyle had to kill their father. He would end up describing the killings, and that Eric told him that Jose and Kitty were surprised when the brothers had burst into the family room. Oziel would describe the threats he'd received from Lyle after the October 31 session with Eric after he confessed to those murders. Now, Leslie and Michael cross-examined him pretty heavily, and they highlighted his affair with Judalyn Smith and a $400,000 lawsuit settlement that she brought against him, and a state board of psychology complaint. This complaint alleged improper drug prescriptions for Smythe and an inappropriate dual relationship with another patient, exchanging therapy for construction work at his home. I want to say, I think I think that's what really hindered the defense's case. He was not a credible guy. He was not a good witness, and I don't think it helped their case at all. So the defense, they spoke for almost 3 months, and the defense then had a really difficult and uphill battle of trying to prove the juries that the brothers were in imminent danger, and that's the reason that they, killed their parents. Now, under California law, the imminent danger defense was the only way the brothers could be completely acquitted of the murders or had a chance of being convicted of manslaughter. Lyle would end up testifying over a 9-day period, and his alleged sexual assault he suffered from the ages of 6 to 8, and the story of how he had sexually molested his little brother when only Eric was 5 years old, they would cry frequently. Like, both brothers cried a lot during that testimony. Lyle would testify that at the age of 13, he came to believe that his dad was actually molesting his little brother, and he testified that his father was so controlling and that his mother was so emotionally unstable that he sought comfort in his own family of stuffed animals, and he created a whole entire world that his animals were alive, his stuffed animals were alive, and this was his fantasy world that he escaped to. And again, guys, this is not the first time I'm hearing things about this. This is what happens when you do have severe abuse. But when Eric began to testify, his demeanor was ragged and it's edgy. He would stare he looked dangerous. He didn't look normal. He looked deranged, is what one person said. And a moment later, he would appear wide-eyed and innocent, but most of the time, he looked more mentally disturbed than sad or remorseful. Okay, take all that away. I don't know how you're meant to look when you're discussing your horrible abuse that you've endured as a child. So that kind of stuff, like when I read that kind of stuff, like I wanted to highlight it because obviously that's something that I read and I understood. But would you appear that way? Like, I don't know how you would look if you're talking about those types of things. So I don't know. But after both sides had been actually heard, Judge Weisberg, he gives Lyle and Eric's juries 4 choices in deciding the brothers' fate. The juries could find the brothers guilty of first-degree murder with special circumstances. They could find the brothers guilty of second-degree murder. They could find the brothers guilty of voluntary manslaughter, or they could find the brothers guilty of involuntary manslaughter. Lyle and Eric would face sentencing on 3 counts: the murder of Jose, the murder of Kitty, and the charge of conspiracy to commit murder. He has not given the jury an opportunity for acquittal. I think taking away that right really disturbs me. I think that that's not fair, and I don't think there's anything right about what he did in that moment, in that judge. It's after 16 days of deliberation. Eric's jury declared a deadlock, and after 24 days, Lyle's jury had also reached a deadlock. It was really and if you get a chance, go and watch the Netflix documentary, because there's one on Stan as well in Australia. I'll have to find it. I'll put it into the comments, or I'll put it into the summary in the description for you guys. The jury they were very, very divided. Some of the men said they didn't see how they could be abused. The women we just weren't sure what really went down. So if you get a chance, watch them, because the jurors make some really interesting points. And it was really intriguing for me that the first jurors versus the second jurors. You have to go and watch it. You have to go and watch some more documentaries. Jury selection, though, began for their retrial in 1995 with opening statements on October 11th. Judge Weisberg once again would rule over them, but he ruled against televising the trial to prevent jurors from outside influence and limited the defence's witnesses on abuse allegation. The retrial would feature 64 witnesses compared to the 101 in the first trial, and it lasted 23 weeks, resembling a typical murder trial without all of the media speculation. Now, for the retrial, David Conn and Carol Najara were both district attorneys in LA County. They replaced Pam Bosnich and Lester. Between those trials, David would end up studying the mistakes from the previous trial, particularly the prosecution's failure to address the brothers' abuse allegations. This time, they would hire forensic psychiatrist Dr. Park Elliott Dietz to assist. He would propose, so David would propose a new theory on the killings, and he chose not to call Dr. Oziel to testify. Smart move, if you ask me. And planned to use the tapes of the brothers' confessions. So he successfully challenged the defense's battered person syndrome claim, preventing it from being shown to the jury. Initially, this is what, like, Pam supported this defense for the brothers. So on November 20th, David concluded the state's case against the Menendez brothers. He presented a total, I think, of 30 witnesses. His focal point of the case was the computer-generated reconstruction of the actual murder. It utilized the reconstruction to illustrate to the jurors that the brothers had intentionally killed the parents. The defense disputed this, though, the reconstruction, because it conflicted with the brothers' testimony in the first trial, where they stated they'd fired the shotguns in a state of panic. They're saying in the second trial, they were saying it was just a little bit more methodical and it was pretty intentional. So on January 30th, after presenting 25 witnesses, this is when the defense would rest. Judge Weisberg permitted only one mental health expert compared to the 5 in the previous trial. So additionally, though, Dr. William Vickery, who had been Eric's psychiatrist since 1990, he was not allowed to testify. So I think, for me, the second trial really hindered the defense. I don't think it was a fair trial at all. I think they had their arms tied behind their backs, and I think that it really was not a fair and just trial, in my opinion. That is just me, in my opinion. But I really don't think they deserved it. I really think it should have been a third trial, personally. And I think Judge Weisberg should have just abdicated himself. I think that's the word, abdicated? And I can't remember the word in judicials, but I don't think he should have allowed. I don't think he should have headed it. On March 20th, though, after 4 days of deliberation, the jury convicted the Menendez brothers of 2 counts of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. They also found 2 special circumstances, lying in wait and multiple murder. These findings left only 2 sentencing options: life without parole or death. The same jury would end up deciding the penalty phase, which ended up being life without parole. So on September 10th in 1996, the California Department of Corrections separated the Menendez brothers. Lyle was moved to California Correctional Institute near Tehachapi, and Eric was moved to the California State Prison near Sacramento. Both were classified as maximum security inmates, but they were segregated from other inmates. The brothers were separated for almost 20 years. I think it was 2014 that they ended up actually being sent to, like, it was years of them asking to be in the same prison, and it was just really one of those things that it kind of breaks my heart. Like, I don't know the intent behind it, and I don't necessarily agree with it personally. But on October 3rd of this year, the Los Angeles District Attorney, George Gasson, announced that his office was reviewing the appeal. So on October 24th, he requested resentencing of the case, and if approved, the brothers would be eligible for parole. He mentioned that premeditation involved and the dysfunction, the molestation in the home, considering the time served and their behaviour in prison. Now, the resentencing trial was initially set for December 11th in 2024, but it's been rescheduled to the 30th of next year, January 30th next year. I think that was due to Attorney George no longer being the district attorney, and a new one is in. I can't remember his name. But I will say one thing, guys. I am of a firm belief that they're going to put this off a little bit more. I think that, unfortunately, I think justice might not come just yet. I would hope so for them. I personally, and this is just my personal opinion, guys, so don't have a crack at me. I really do think that they've served their time. They've never denied, up until their murder trial, they have never denied killing their parents. Personally, I think they've served their time. They they deserve to have a life somewhat. I think they were very young boys caught in a situation, and I think it was column A, and I do think it was column B. I think it was, I think there was some abuse, and I think that there was something, and I do think greed was involved. I think they were worried about not having money anymore, but I do think they were abused. I really do. I really, really do. Anyway, guys, thank you for listening to this week's episode. If you like this podcast, please hit the subscribe button, hit the like button if you've liked this episode. At the start of the episode, I provided a link to my previous Menendez Brothers episode. So if you really like this, go back and watch it, guys. If you are new to my podcast or to this channel, go and hit that subscribe button. Have a great weekend. I do have a TikTok and I also have an Instagram, so please go and follow me. I hope you have a fabulous weekend, my paynuts, and I shall talk to you soon. Thanks, guys.